Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session called Getting to Know the PTE General and Why a Certificate Still Matters. Today, we will be hearing from Jane Bledsoe, Pearson English's Senior Product Manager for PTE General and PTE Young Learners exams. She has worked in product management roles within Pearson for 7 years and is currently responsible for innovations related to these certificate exams. As some quick housekeeping before we get started, we will be having a short Q&A session towards the end of this webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions in the questions box at any time during the talk. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. This webinar session will also be recorded and available shortly after the session in case you would like to share it with friends or colleagues. Certificates of attendance will also be emailed after today's session. And now I'm happy to pass it over to Jane.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone to Getting to Know PTE General and Why a Certificate Still Matters. I have some really interesting data to share with you all today. We have been doing a lot of research over the last few years, and as product manager for PTE General, we're just learning all the time from you as teachers and from our test takers about what they need going into the future. And so that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. So thanks for joining us, and let's go ahead and get started. What is PTE General? We're going to start at the very top of the agenda with that information, because I don't know how many of you who are on the line today have had any experience with PTE General. It's been around a long time, 35 plus years, I think, but it is not as well known as Cambridge. And yet we have some really great things about this test that make us, I think, even more appealing than Cambridge. Who takes the test? We'll talk about our test takers and what we've learned about them. We've been surveying general English language test takers for a couple of years now, and they've told us a lot about what they need, what they want, and how they're using their certificate. So I'll share some of that information, but then I'm going to pass it to you to take a poll and let us know how you think your candidates, your learners, your students are using certificates today, and is that going to change? Then we're going to talk about how we're supporting our test takers with test prep anytime, anywhere, particularly in this era of COVID and what it's made us all, how it's made us all change in terms of what we need to provide to them. I'll share with you some computer-based assessment items that we're developing for this year and next, and how we're future-proofing this test. And then finally, we'll talk about a certificate for life. Let's go ahead and start with, what is PTE General? Well, I think it's best to pass this back to our customers, have them tell us what PTE General is. And so that's what you'll see at the very top of your page there. And this is a quote from one of our customers, our big customers in Mexico, where she said, really, the certification that we're offering through PTE General gives us a lot of credibility, gives the team some credibility with the academic process, because it is fulfilling the promise that students can effectively communicate in English when they graduate and they get that certificate for a B2 or a C1. They can take that anywhere they're going, and they can prove they have the skills to support it. So we are really proud of the fact that we take that very seriously in terms of the certificates that we issue. We are marking all of our tests in the UK today, and we'll continue to have that centralized marking process, because that is how we can be sure that our candidates are truly at the level that we expect them to be. What else does PTE General do? It reliably and accurately assesses communicative ability and how language is used in real life. This is not a test of grammar. This is not a test where students need to memorize a lot of vocabulary. They should be able to use vocabulary appropriately. And we are going to test all 4 skills of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Primarily the test takers who are taking PTE General today are 14 and over. We have some very young test takers at 14, I think, who are really tackling some pretty sophisticated topics, because the 14-year-old gets the same test that a 24-year-old gets. So we know that we keep an eye on that content to make sure that it is relevant for each of those different kinds of test takers. This is a qualification that's awarded by Pearson Edexcel, and if you're not familiar with Edexcel, they are responsible for all the A-level and GCSEs testing that happens in the UK, and issue more than 130 million exams a year. So all of that strength and assessment comes from Edexcel, and we borrow from their very best to put together PTE General. Today, this is a paper-based test, but we're going to talk a little bit more about where we're going with this assessment into the future, and the fact that we will have a computer-based version of it next year. But it is today 100% created, marked, and awarded in England, and regulated by Ofqual. So we hold true to our standards. Ofqual holds us accountable to those standards. And that remains, regardless of what iteration of this test taker may take in the future, computer or paper, it will still be regulated by Ofqual. Currently, we have 7 test sessions a year for the paper-based test. But with the computer-based test, we're going to introduce on-demand test taking so that you as teachers and your learners can choose when it's the best time for them to take that test. This is awarded to learners in more than 50 countries and increasingly recognized by local universities and businesses. We compare ourselves to the Cambridge Main Suite primarily, and we have been around, as I said, for a long time. 1985 is when this test was originally developed. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a recognition brochure that we put together recently. It has a little comparison of PTE General against Cambridge and Oxford. And while we are 100% marked in the UK, we are Ofqual regulated like Cambridge is, and we're internationally recognized like both Oxford and Cambridge, with a little less name recognition, as I'm sure you know. A quick overview on the paper-based test and what it includes. I've got a couple pictures here of the speaking test. There's usually a describe the picture kind of an exercise. And then the written test is a combination of listening and multiple choice, some writing items, and you know, it follows a really strict format that doesn't change over time. We use an item bank process though, so the items will change, but the format remains the same, which makes it very predictable for our learners, but also for you as teachers. Where are we going with the paper-based test? Well, it will continue to be a 4 skills mandatory exam. You will have to take reading, writing, listening, and speaking in order to earn a certificate. So that's really an important quality, we think, of having communicative skills, is being able to measure them on all 4 skills. This is a certificated exam, and that's the primary purpose of our presentation today, is to talk with you about what that certificate means. But they do all get a paper certificate if they pass the test, and that validates their level. Ages 14 to adult, that continues to be true moving forward. Today it takes about 6 weeks to get scores, but we're trying to reduce that time all of the time and hope that by next year we can turn those around in about 4 weeks. Currently we have 7 test sessions a year. They have primarily been early in the year, February, March, and then a series of tests in May, June. This year we had a July session as well. And then we will have sessions yet this year in October, November, and December. We are leaving it up to the individual geographies as to whether or not they can deliver those tests given the COVID situation that we are in. But we have the tests available and we can deliver them in those months. The extended certification is something we're working on, and what we hope to do there is allow students to earn the next CEFR band below the one they've taken if they've scored high enough. We have some test takers, not a lot, but a few every series that scored just below the pass mark on the exam that they've sat for. So a B2 student might have just missed that pass mark by a few points. We want to be able to give them a B1 certificate in that case. So we are looking at introducing that extended certification next year. We are also working on aligning the GSE scale. GSE, for those of you who don't know, is the global scale of English, and the global scale of English underpins a lot of our really excellent courseware. It will help PTE General tie more tightly to that courseware so you can use those books to prepare your students. And so GSE scale is very exciting for us to be able to introduce that. The reason why PTE General doesn't have the GSE scale or the GSE points associated right now is because, frankly, PTE General came before the GSE scale was designed. And so now we're kind of backtracking and saying, okay, how does this test line up to that GSE scale, and what are the appropriate ranges? So we're doing a lot of data analysis on that for this next year, and we'll have some really good news, I think, to report for you in 2021. We have an exciting new practice test, a readiness test that we are launching in October of this year. I'll be telling you more about that today. And then finally, we have a mobile practice app that just came out for both Android and Apple devices. And I've got some links for that as well on this slide deck. So when you get the slides, you're certainly welcome to check that out. Now let's talk about who takes this test. Well, there are a lot of different kinds of test takers, as I mentioned, everyone from 14 to 24 years old, or and sometimes even older, taking PTE General. What we did back in 2018, when we were just defining our roadmap for the future with PTE General, is we went out and we found general English test takers, some of whom had taken Cambridge, some of whom had taken Oxford and other tests. And we asked them questions about, how do you decide which test to take? What are the primary things you think about? And the top thing that came back was the type of certificate I'll get as a result. Clearly, they're using this kind of a test to take them on their journey to achieve their goals. So I've got 3 prototypes of test takers. These aren't real test takers. These are really nice pictures of test takers on the left-hand side of your screen. Carmen from Mexico City, Jorge from Madrid, Spain, and Pavel from Warsaw, Poland. Now, these are prototypes of the kinds of test takers that we heard from in this research. There were 750 respondents to our research in Europe, Mexico, and Argentina. And after they told us that the certificate was the most important thing that they got out of taking this test, they also reflected to us what other things are important to them about taking a general test of English. And it really came down to flexibility. How flexible is the date, the time, the location, and how quickly am I going to get my results? So we know that these are really important things that we needed to build into our roadmap going forward. Another thing we asked as part of this research was, why are you taking it? What's your primary motivation? And you can see here that the primary motivation for nearly every country, test takers in every country, was to benefit their career. So these are very career-oriented test takers taking this exam, even at younger ages. So the only bar that kind of shrinks down a little bit here was for Poland. So you'll see the dark blue is Argentina, the red is Mexico, the green is Italy, the purple is Spain, and the light blue is Poland. Now you'll see that the highest respondent rate for Poland was to improve their English in general. And then also, if you look at the next highest response from Poland, it was for social reasons. So although test takers are really career-oriented, we can see in Poland and probably some other instances as well throughout these countries, where that general English skill is being used for social reasons and just to be able to converse on a global scale, whether that's through the internet, or something that game playing, whatever it is that's important in their lives, they're using those English skills beyond just the job market. So I thought this was quite telling in terms of motivation and where we need to focus our energy from a content standpoint and from a certification standpoint going forward. Here's a few more things that we learned out of this research, and you can see some really specific quotes from people around these countries about how they're leveraging their certificate. So you'll see a lot if you go on the right-hand side what they say. You'll see in Argentina, it's about jobs. You'll see in Spain, it's a little bit more general, you know, taking trips abroad, knowing the language, being adaptable to anyone. In Mexico, they're competing for positions. In Argentina, also, you're seeing jobs, you're seeing multinational companies and proving their knowledge. So there are lots of different reasons, career-oriented, but there are also many reasons, generally speaking, that people want this certificate. Why they do it? Well, we know that English is the global language, that they can use it anywhere they go, pretty much. It's widely communicated. It gives them those promotional opportunities they're alluding to in some of these statements. And sometimes it is even a specific job requirement. We've seen that in some countries where in order to get a civil service type job or to be a teacher, you need to have that English language skill and you need to prove it with documentation of a certificate. So this has been really interesting for us to dig in with these kinds of test takers and learn more about their motivation. Let's go to the next slide. Sorry, there we go. So where are they heading? If they have some career objectives, where are these test takers going and what kinds of jobs do they want? You can see that the highest response for them was around technology, R&D type roles. That's where the certificate comes in especially handy because it is so competitive, as well as travel and tourism and education. And then government, business services, and transportation also rank fairly high when you consider all of the careers they could choose from. These are the 6 that really stood out in this pool of 750 candidates who took this survey. So we know that to be competitive in these industries, they need a certificate to do it. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about the certificate. That is the subject of our session today. And so what we wanted to do was dig in and find out just a little bit more about how they're using the certificate, what format is that certificate in, what's their expected turnaround time, and then how are they using it, with whom. So at the top left, you will see the type of certificate first. Most of these test takers are using a paper certificate. They receive one, I know, from Cambridge. They receive one from us. But are they using it in paper form? And I think the answer is clearly yes. About 23% are using an e-certificate and 17% have no preference. But that 59% is a pretty astounding number. 60% of them still using paper. What's the expected turnaround time in receiving a certificate? Well, 37% expect it to take 3 or 4 weeks, and another 25% expect it to take less at 1 or 2 weeks, and 6% less than 1 week. So yes, the expected turnaround time is quicker than what we're delivering it today. So we know we have some work to do on getting that shorter and shorter turnaround time. How will the certificate be shared? Well, as an attachment on my CV was the biggest response rate for all countries, even Poland, who was kind of that group of test takers that we thought were a little more interested in the social aspect. But then secondarily, showing at face-to-face meetings or interviews was second in terms of the most responses. So again, we know that this certificate should be able to be shared electronically if they're submitting a CV online, but you should be able to print it out and have it available at those interview occasions as well. So it is time for a poll. I've told you a lot about what the test takers are telling us and how they're using certificates, but this data is a little bit old. 2018, it's 2 years ago. So now we want to take a little time out here for a poll and ask you this question. In what ways has COVID changed the needs or uses of English language proficiency certificates? I think that we have a poll open. And are you all seeing a chance to vote there? Your answer choices are A, no change, B, the score report is becoming more important, C, digital verification is replacing the paper certificate, or D, both B and C. I'll give you all a minute.
All right, let's look at the results. So it looks like 42% have said that digital verification is replacing the paper certificate, followed by the option for both B and C, where score report is becoming more important, then also the digital verification. 10% says there's no change, and then only 9% of you think that score report is becoming more important.
Great, thanks, Jen. Good. Okay, so let's see what in follow-up, we did another follow-up survey with test takers in Mexico and Poland, and we asked them this same question. Now, this was a prior to COVID, but still we wanted to see if some of their responses would change in a year's time. So we know IELTS, TOEFL, and Cambridge are all providing physical certificates. We know that these self-motivated adult candidates, those that are pursuing new job pursuits based on this certificate, they don't mind receiving an e-certificate. So the 42% of you that said digital verification and 10% who said no change, I think you're right on here. They don't mind receiving an e-certificate that they can share digitally with universities and employers. Institutional candidates are the ones that are really needing the paper form to take to their universities. So I thought that was also very interesting to see that difference by age group and by where they're coming from. And then finally, some universities have their own kinds of certificates that they're issuing to candidates in paper. But I do think COVID, as you have stated pretty clearly, COVID may be changing this going forward. So we're going to continue to be looking at this in the format for the certificate. Not that they will ever stop receiving a certificate, but the format could change in time. All right, let's move on. So the other thing that COVID has really done is made an impact on us in terms of the kinds of prep we need to make available for test takers and for you as teachers. There's a lot more remote learning going on right now. And so we have just launched a mobile app. We have some mock tests that I want to show you today, and we have some ebooks in Practice Test Plus that have just been released. And we have more going on around computer-based assessment. So we're going to talk about these things next. Let's first talk about remote learning and test taker prep. We just launched something called the Warm-Up Practice app. What it does is it takes real items from past exams and it puts it into a digital format that any test taker can use their phones to access. This is a free app. It will give them access to reading, writing, listening, and speaking items. It will tell them as they move through those items if they are right or wrong when it comes to the reading questions and the listening questions. When it comes to writing and speaking, though, what we're providing there are some model answers. So they can submit their written content and they can record themselves speaking. But then they have the ability to see a written form that they should aspire to, as well as a spoken recording that they should aspire to. We're calling those model answers. So they get a chance to kind of check themselves in that respect. There are 3 practice tests loaded per level and lots of items for them to practice. We also have a separate dictation area. We know dictation is one of those skills on our test that is not really in any other of our competitor tests, not in the same way. And so we do have a variety of dictation items on this app to give them lots of practice with that. There is some fun gamification here where they can earn points. It shows them their time spent. And we're also working on an aspect of this app where they can see how others in their country or around the world are spending their time to see if they're doing things the same way or differently. You'll see that the links to both the Android device and the Apple device option are on the screen here. So when you have these slides, please feel free to check it out. Play with it yourself. Give us some feedback. That would be great. We also have some free mock exams online that we just produced this spring. The nice thing about this is if students aren't able to get to the classroom, they can still take this mock test. On the far left, you will see the student edition, an editable PDF form of it. So they can open that. You can send it to them on the day that you want them to take it. And they open it, they put their name on it, and they can fill it out online, capture it as that PDF, and send back to you. So you can actually score it. They don't get the answer key, they only get the questions. Similarly, there is a spoken paper with 4 different exercises in the spoken test where you could do a Zoom meeting or you could do something remotely to give that speaking test. And then finally, on the right-hand side, you'll see that this is a teacher edition of this exam. It's got the written and the spoken component in it, and it is password protected. So the students cannot get to the answers without the password. If you want the password, you can find it on our website, but you're free to use these as mock papers. There are 2 versions of it at each level right now. And again, we'd really love to hear your feedback on whether or not students like that editable PDF format. You can find these on our website, and that location is also on this slide, pearson.com PTE General, and then look for resources to find it. Really exciting for us is the launch of Practice Test Plus this year. Practice Test Plus, we haven't had a new edition for a few years, so this is really exciting. At levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is really A2 to C1, we have a version of these books for those 4 levels with 5 complete practice tests included. At the basic level, test 1 and 2 give a lot of guidance to the test taker on what to do, what to notice about that kind of question, really helping them understand what to do on the test at various places within the exam. In addition, if the students are using these books and you're using them, whether it's the ebook or the print version, there are other tools on our website that can be made available to you for practice. Speaking and writing banks, a grammar reference bank, other online resources, and even some speaking test videos that can be really handy to you in helping prepare your students for this test. So just know these are available now. There's a link here. Really exciting content to see brand new. And if you attended the Tuesday for Teachers last week, you would have heard Joanne Sale talking more specifically about how to use these resources. So if you didn't get a chance to attend, I'm sure that that recorded track is on our website. So look for that and get a lot more detail on these books. We're very excited about them. Now, it is time for another poll. We talked already about the fact that COVID is having an impact on our test takers who are remote learning all the time now. So what does that mean for computer-based testing? So my first poll question here is, How important will computer-based testing be to English language assessment in the future? We know remote learning is happening. Is remote testing also a wave of the future? So we'll give you a minute to answer that question before we go to our second poll.
Okay, lots of great feedback. Thank you. So it seems that the majority of you think that it's very important. 64%
Wow.
indicated very important, while 28% said it's important, and 7% said not sure.
Okay.
Nobody thought that it was not at all important.
Wow, that's great. Okay, very interesting. I think this has changed a lot in the last couple of years because we did some teacher polls, not in a webinar format, but just through surveys a couple years back, and it was about a 50-50 proposition at that time in 2018 about whether or not teachers felt like CBT testing, computer-based testing was a thing for the future. Really interesting. Thank you. Okay, next one. What do you think is going to happen with paper-based testing? Let's put our crystal balls on and look into that crystal ball and tell me, is paper-based testing going to become a dinosaur? Or we're not quite sure. It will coexist with computer-based testing, or it is here to stay.
Wow. Okay, so these results are great. So 85% of you thought it will coexist with computer-based testing, while 8% thought it's going to become a dinosaur, and 6% say it's here to stay.
Okay, great. I'm jotting this down because I think that's really important to us going forward. And we have in mind to really have these two forms of the test coexist for PTE General. So the fact that 85% of you believe that should be the case, I think we're on the right track. Our roadmap is correct. We will have a paper-based and a computer-based form of this test for the foreseeable future. But let's go to what test takers had to say on this topic. Again, this is Mexico and Poland primarily from May of 2019. And we wanted to ask them, what do they want from testing going forward? And what they are really looking for was quick score turnaround time and detailed reporting in any kind of testing they did in the future. In fact, those were the two of the top things and the top 6 reasons that influenced their decision to take a test: quick score turnaround time and detailed reporting. They have a preference for a computer-based test if it is also including some of the benefits of paper-based testing, maybe being able to go back and forth and check your answers, and having the actual assessment and scoring by a person. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're using that information as we move forward to our computer-based testing solutions. And then finally, they said they want prep materials that can be accessed both via mobile and desktop devices, with an option to print when it's needed. So I think some of the test prep that we have been working on also meets this need. So how are we future-proofing PTE General? Let's start with our computer-based readiness testing. First of all, when we looked back at the 2018 data that I shared with you earlier about our test takers who are taking the PTE General test, and also taking our competitors' tests for English language proficiency, we found out a few things about who prefers online testing. And it is primarily those who have a need for that quicker turnaround time on results, and those are professionals. These are a lot of test takers out there who are employed. They're looking for a B2 or a C1 because they need it for work. And primarily we're seeing our markets for online testing in Italy, Poland, Spain, Mexico, and Argentina. Now, if you're in a country that's not listed there, that doesn't mean it isn't relevant to you. It simply means of the areas that we're targeting in 2021 with the computer-based test, we know we have a population of really motivated test takers who want the online version. They need it close to home. They need it flexible from a time standpoint, a date standpoint. They don't want to worry about where they're having to go for two different forms of the test. They want one quick, easy solution to computer-based testing. And so I thought that this is meaningful because as we start predicting who's going to be taking that computer-based test, it gives us just a little window of insight on who will be there lining up to take it. Let's talk about the readiness test. Now, the computer-based readiness test is meant to allow a student to find out from anywhere at any time what their skills look like when it comes to general English language testing. So they will select which level they're wanting to take. So a test taker who needs to pass a B1 test will take the B1 readiness test. And it will have all 4 skills. They are computer assessed immediately upon taking that exam, and they will get a readiness level for each of their 4 skills. In the example on the page here, you can see that our student had potentially ready skills in the listening and reading section, but not quite ready around speaking. Seemed to have pretty good writing skills though, quite ready there. And at the very top of the page then, they're getting their readiness indicator. They're potentially ready, but may have a little more work to do. Well, how should they improve? That's the great thing about this score report. It tells them how they can improve with some real exercises taken from real courseware. And there's a variety of options listed in this courseware mapping so that it should correspond with perhaps the books you are using locally. There will also be some general suggestions if they're not using a book at all. They will get general selections on what they can do to be successful and get ready for this test at that B1 level. As I mentioned before, we're going to have a multi-level test here. So it's different than if any of you are familiar with PT Academic. It's not one test for all levels. You actually do have to select your level. And in the case of the readiness test, when we launch it in October, we'll be launching with an A2, a B1, a B2, and a C1 level. That's where the bulk of our students are located. But the great thing about this readiness test is they can take it online, anytime, anywhere, with a basic computer and a headset and an internet connection. Now you may want to have them take it in your school. If you guys are getting together and you have your schools open and you want to do it as a group, great, they can do it that way. But if they're not going to make it to the classroom for some time, they can also do this from home. So this really meets those flexibility needs that we heard about from these test takers back in 2018, who said the date, the time, the place is quite important to them. Where they're taking this needs to be convenient for them, and the speed of the results is so important for them. So we're launching this test in October. We're really excited for people to have an experience with it and get some feedback. So there will be a variety of reports that are also done for teachers and not just the learner themselves. And that will group your students into a list so you'll be able to see what proportion of the students are ready, not ready, and potentially ready. So it should be a really good way to know how your class is doing. Then next year, we are launching our computer-based form of PTE General. And we expect that this is going to, again, meet the needs of these learners who said, I need to pick the date, I need to pick the time, I need to pick the place. More than 7 times a year, I need an on-demand version of this test. So that's what the computer-based test will deliver. More convenience, a simple online booking process. They can book it up to 24 hours in advance of when they want to take it. It will be on demand in your local communities with test centers that make themselves available to those students. And there will be an online format for them to schedule that test. Every one of these tests is under 2 hours. So it's a quick test, but it has all 4 skills incorporated in one sitting. And I think they're going to find the convenience of that just really nice. They don't have to schedule 2 different times to take a speaking and a written test. Now it's all computer assessed. That will be delivered at Pearson run test centers. So you can see on the right-hand side here a picture of what a Pearson VUE test center might look like. There will always be someone observing the candidates as they test, but they will be in a separate room. They will be in front of a computer. They will have headphones, and they will be speaking into the computer for their speaking test. Now, in our first iteration of this computer-based test, those results are going to come back to us in London, and we will have human scorers interacting with that data on the first tests that are delivered next year. We are establishing with those human raters, human scorers, human markers, the way in which we will train the engine for artificial intelligence scoring in the future. But we think it's really important that there is that human touch. And you'll remember one of the comments from the students was computer-based testing can be successful if what we have on the back end is some humans actually looking and listening to those recordings, making some judgments, and then training an engine to understand all of those variations of human raters and all of those variations of test taker content. So lots happening with computer-based testing next year. We're very excited about it. We'll have the digital delivery. We will have fast turnaround time on results. And we'll have a lot more information coming out about this in just a few months. We'll also have a lot of support for you as teachers. I know that for some of you, if you haven't had your students taking computer-based tests before, it might be a little daunting to think about how to prepare them. Well, the content is still general English content. So a B2 computer-based test is going to be much like a B2 paper-based test in terms of the things we're measuring: reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills. And so from that standpoint, we are expecting the same kind of communicative skills, but maybe a just slightly different format in how it's presented in the test itself. So the first thing we're going to do, and it will be coming out in just a couple of months, is a computer-based test familiarization guide for you as teachers and also for your students. We think that will help a great deal to alleviate any concerns or worries about how different the test might be. We'll give you examples of the test items, much like you see on the right-hand side of the screen, and then you'll know exactly what you're dealing with in terms of the item types. We have a webinar series that will begin next year. We have a teacher advisory board that we're going to be instituting, so you can give us some great feedback on what you want to see in terms of resources and tools going forward. We'll have a test spec and a validation report to share with you. We'll have question type walkthrough, PowerPoint slides. We'll have guidance for users and for test takers on how to schedule a test, how to sign up to take a test, and that will be using an online system called the Test Hub, which we aren't going to go into any level of detail on today, but it is going to be a very easy way for both you, institutions, test centers, and test takers to get scheduled. Finally, the other thing we're doing to really future-proof PTE General is we are doing a name change. Some of you might have heard of this. We are going from PTE General to Pearson English International Certificate. Why are we doing this? Well, because we believe that this new name means something more. It actually spells out the benefits to the test takers. It gives a certificate. It is an international exam, and that's important to deliver on that value proposition in the name. It also removes confusion. Many of you might be familiar with PTE Academic. If you Google PTE today, that is who you find. And PTE Academic is really used for a different purpose. It is a different test used for immigration and study abroad purposes primarily. PTE General is primarily used by students who stay in their own country to get better jobs, to have better opportunities in their local universities, etc. So we need to remove the confusion between the PTEs. And then finally, many teachers actually told us in teacher research we have done that they didn't know what PTE stood for. And so we want to pull the Pearson name up to the front. And so everyone knows this is a test delivered by Pearson. We think this is the best time for the name change early next year when we're introducing the computer-based tests. So both of the tests have the same name. And I don't think it also, it actually helps us a lot if we have Pearson reflected with the Edexcel name, because Edexcel has so much in terms of experience with assessment, that we will be pulling that front and center in all of our marketing efforts as well. Here's an example of what the certificate looks like today. So let's come back around to how the certificate is impacted by name change and what the timeline is around that. So you can see here that the name on the certificate doesn't change much. It's still Pearson Edexcel level ESOL International. And then we will be introducing that Pearson English International certificate to the top of the certificate. We will continue to use the Pearson Test of English General also on the certificate for some time until all of the recognition from your universities and from your ministries of education are in place for the new name. But we have a variety of new collateral available featuring both names this year. We have new test center plaques that we're getting ready to send out in September. We will have a new web page for the Pearson English website that refers to the new name in October. And then finally, on the certificate, we'll see that name change show up around March. And then going forward, you'll see PTE General's name will stay with it as well for quite some time. So before I close out, I just wanted to circle back to the topic of our conversation today, which is why does a certificate still matter? You can see some of the responses from our participants in research from 2018 from Mexico, Poland, and Italy. But I do think what really makes a certificate important is because it allows our test takers to achieve their goals, whether that's personal or academic or professional. And it validates all the work you as teachers are doing with these students to say, yes, we have B1, B2, C1, C2 learners, and they're accomplishing their objectives, and this certificate really speaks to that. We think that's powerful to be able to rely on the certificate as they move forward in their life with their goals. And we think that PTE General is a really good option in terms of delivering on the solutions that test takers are looking for. So if you have any questions at this point in time, this does conclude the formal part of the presentation, but I think Jen has been collecting some chat questions, and I'm happy to answer any that you have at this time.
Thanks, Jane, for a great session. We do have a lot of questions that have come in, and please continue to ask them in the questions box. We'll get to as many as we can. So the first question is, are the paper tests more reliable of a person's skills than the computer tests?
Such a good question, because it is one of those things that we think is critical to the promise of this test, is that the paper-based test and the computer-based test deliver equivalent outcomes. And so we've been looking at this since we made the decision to do a computer-based form of the test with our research team and with examiners around the world. What we did is we started with looking at the item types that are going into both paper and computer-based tests to ensure that they have the same level of difficulty. So while some people might find a computer is easier to work on than handwriting a test, not others may not. But we really didn't dig into the mode so much as we dug into the content and made sure that there was similarity in the difficulty level of the items themselves. So that has been research that's been going on now since we started building this new test, so about a year. We've got good data on that. And we'll continue to monitor that as test takers continue to take the test. We will be doing some pilots early next year and having test takers take both forms of the test so we can be sure that they're equatable. But that is the way that we think we can deliver on the promise, is by continuing that research as we move forward.
Great, thank you. The next question is, for the computer-based tests, how can we be sure that the students are not cheating during the test?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of security built in with the computer-based test. And because they have to go to a Pearson VUE test center, they have to demonstrate that they are who they say they are with an ID. They will have to sign in, and so their signature needs to match their ID signature. So we'll know at the place of delivery that they are who they say they are. But then how do we keep them from cheating from there? The computer-based test is the only thing on their screen. So they will not be able to look for any other answers anywhere else during the test itself. They also are going to lose access to that test the moment they leave the test center. So they can't really copy and paste or send questions to anyone. And we will always have 3 forms of this test in circulation. So they may have very different forms of the test. If there's 15 people in a room, you know, there could be those 3 different tests circulating amongst that group, so they won't be able to really cheat from each other either. So there's lots of things that we're doing to ensure that this is a secure test and that cheating is kept to a minimum. Now, if we see something in the data that makes us think, oh, this test taker completed too fast and too well, we'll stop the score report from going through the system, and we will look at the data and we will assess on the back end if there's any incidents of potential cheating going on and investigate that.
Great, thank you. The next question is, will there be any discussion that test takers can do this test at home in the future? Thinking of the COVID situation with closed test centers and countries with only a few centers, it would be much more convenient for students to take the test from home.
Yes, that is something that we are looking into. And we know that remote proctoring is a solution that many of our competitors are using, and PT Academic is also going to be using in the near future. So we are also looking at what remote proctoring could do in terms of this exam. And I would guess that it's going to be later next year before it's ready. But we definitely see that as a way of the future and allowing students, you know, and it's not just COVID related, but there are test takers out there who can't get to a big city to take a test. And we don't want them to be disadvantaged and have a chance to take this exam and allow them to achieve their objectives and their goals regardless of where they're sitting. So remote proctoring is definitely part of our roadmap for the future.
Thank you. The next question is, how would the speaking part of the exam be graded?
The speaking part of the exam is going to be graded using standards established with the paper-based test. So we have a group of examiners that will be trained on the computer-based test. They will have the same standards as our paper-based test observes today. And so that spoken test initially will be graded by human markers who will listen to the audio recordings and establish whether or not those candidates have met the standard. All that data then is saved up, as I mentioned, and then it will be used to train the engine. So in the future, automatic scoring can happen with speaking tests, but not until we have about 8,000 examples of tests to train the engine with. So I hope that answers that question.
I think it does. Thank you. The next question is, what should teachers do if students don't have a mobile phone? Can they still prepare for the exam?
Absolutely. So we have lots of resources on our website. I mentioned those mock exams today. Those don't have to be used on a mobile phone. As long as they have a computer, access to a computer, and you could send them by email, they can take that PDF on a computer and fill it out. So they don't need a mobile phone. Now, the app itself is only on mobile phones, but the mock test could be used in place of the mobile app to do the same kinds of practice.
Thank you. And the next question is there an expiration of the test result?
Oh, that is such a good question. And the headline on this slide was meant to remind me to say something about that. So our certificate never expires. There is not an expiration date on a PTE General certificate. If you earn a B2 tomorrow, it's good for the next however many years your institution, your job, your university wants to accept it. We don't expire these credentials. So, and then the score reports are another form of results that test takers will get from the test hub. And we're still working on how long we will archive those results, but it really doesn't expire. They should have access to that information into perpetuity. We do not expect that there will be any challenge with getting their credentials in the future, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if they needed it.
Thank you. With just a couple minutes left, I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. So the first one is, how do I register for the PTE General exam?
Great question. So to register today, you need to find a test center in your area. And on our website, where it's delivered is a link at the very bottom of our website, and that's pearson.com/PTE General. So you can find test centers that are delivering our test now on the paper-based side. We have 7 test instances per year, as I mentioned. With the computer-based test, we're going to have a different resource called the Test Hub. And the Test Hub will be a place you can go and search for availability of exams in your area and register online. You can either register your test takers, register yourself if you want to take it. And that's where all of that registration will happen for the computer-based side of the test. Learners themselves can register themselves. So we think that's going to be a really accessible, easy way for you to get the computer-based test registered.
Perfect, thanks. How much does it cost to take the test? How does the price differ between the paper and computer-based tests?
Well, that is going to be different by market. For the most part, the test is slightly more expensive than the paper-based test. The computer-based test is it's really dependent on which country you're in, what the price will be. So I really can't state that with any degree of confidence right now. The other thing to know about pricing is that if an institution buys it, they may pass along different prices to the student. So we're not exactly sure how that is going to look. We do know that our pricing will be below what Cambridge is charging. So it will be less expensive than Cambridge. Computer-based testing will be slightly more than paper, but exactly what that amount is really depends on where you're located.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. How can a school or institution become a test center for the computer-based tests and paper-based tests?
Oh, it's such a great question because we are looking into that right now. You can become a Pearson VUE Test Center and deliver exams for your own students as well as people in the public. And there's an opportunity even for some cash flow there, which is nice. So what I would recommend you do is you go to Google and type in how to become a Pearson VUE Test Center. It will give you all the explanation you need for how to set up your center, what you're going to need to prove, what pictures you need to take, what kinds of equipment you're going to need. All of those things will be specified in that link.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jane. And I think we're at the top of the hour. So thank you so much for the informative webinar. I think everybody learned a lot, including myself. So any sort of certificates or webinar recording will be emailed to everyone. And if you have any problems accessing that, you're more than welcome to email sales@pearsonkt.com if you are not receiving those emails. So thank you, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon or morning or evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. Bye now.